Well, Pastor Garid is not here this morning, so he has asked me to share from the Word, and we're going to be in the book of Matthew, chapter 9 here this morning. So if you have your Bibles or your Bible apps, turn to Matthew chapter 9. My name is Pastor Steve Sanchez. I'm one of the assistant pastors here at Vision Calvary. My wife and I have been here for just over a decade. We're so blessed by this church and so blessed to really fall under Pastor Garid's leadership. We're taught so well Sunday mornings, and so looking forward to digging in here this morning as we really parachute in to the story of a man named Matthew, and then the conversations that take place after this encounter, culminating in an interaction that Jesus has with two people that I feel we can draw application from here this morning. And so Matthew chapter 9, and the title of my message is New Name, New Clothes, New Life. And we're going to unpack those three. So in our story this morning, we are introduced there in Matthew chapter 9 to a man by the name of Matthew. Now, the other gospel writers, Mark specifically, tells us that he was the son of Alphaeus, and Mark chapter 2 tells us that his name was Levi. And so he's meeting Jesus here up close and personal for the first time, and he would become one of Jesus's 12 disciples. Not only that, he would pen one of the four gospels, the very gospel that we are reading here this morning, Matthew, as a part of the Mark, Luke, and John series. So he was a man who understood Jesus, was inspired by the Spirit to take the truths of his teachings and disseminate them in practical ways for the reader to be able to read and digest and respond to the teachings of Jesus. So our story picks up here in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. Read with me. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, follow me. So Matthew arose and he followed him. Now, many of us are familiar with this story. It's that story of Jesus calling Matthew. My goal is to provide some background information so that we understand the significance of this encounter. This singular encounter would be the pinnacle, would be what shifts Matthew's life entirely. For you see, Matthew in this day would have come from a Jewish family. Many believe he would have been from the family and tribe of Levi, which meant he should have followed the priestly lineage, should have been in ministry. But instead, he is a tax collector. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because his name is Levi, but when Jesus meets him, Jesus calls him Matthew. And we can't be 100% certain, but conjecture here. I personally believe, because knowing Jesus' character, that he's in the business of meeting us where we are, but not leaving us the way we are, but changing us and growing us and using us. I believe Jesus is looking ahead at Levi's life and saying, Levi, of the tribe of Levi, an Israelite, what are you doing in this tax collector's booth? I'm going to not only radically transform your life, but it's going to start with the changing of your name. And he called him Matthew this day. Now, Matthew literally means gift of God. Now, if anyone knew Matthew in that day, sitting behind that tax collector booth, they would call him anything but a gift from God. You see, tax collectors were the most hated there in Jewish society. For you see, they didn't have published tax brackets back then. And so what happened is people would bid on the taxes that the Roman authorities required of a certain region and district, and it would go to the highest bidder. That bidder recognized what their obligation to Rome was, and then they can charge above and beyond that obligation, and all that became profit. So it was pretty customary in Matthew's day, in Jesus' day, for tax collectors to take advantage of people. They knew what their obligation to Rome was, and they would ask for more. And because there weren't published tax rates back then, they got a bad reputation for fleecing the body, the church, people. They would have a wheel tax and a fish tax and a farm tax, an air tax that you would breathe. I'm exaggerating here, but they would figure out a reason. Now, Matthew was strategic. He was a wise businessman. He stationed his tax booth there in Capernaum, which is located in the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee, the major thoroughway from Egypt going up to Syria. It was well-traveled, well-populated, and Capernaum was where Jesus made his headquarters during his Galilean ministry. It's what he called his home base. And here was Matthew, right? Despised by his family, no doubt, hadn't been to church in a very long time because he dared to assume the occupation of tax collector. Despised, hated, rejected, out of fellowship, isolated, a man focused on his career. No doubt successful, and no doubt accumulated incredible wealth. And while deep down inside there was a longing in Matthew, he allowed his success to be king and God in his life until this moment. But you see, I love this because Jesus met Matthew right at his tax booth. Sitting in the middle of his life, in the middle of his mess, in the middle of his disobedience, he met Matthew there in the middle of his compromise, in the middle of his unbelief. He didn't ask Matthew to come out. He met him where he was, and he simply invited him and said, Matthew, it's time. Come follow me. And I love Matthew's response. It says there in verse 9, he arose and followed him with immediacy. In fact, Matthew doesn't tell us this because it would be like me bragging about the story of meeting Jesus. Yeah, Jesus came to me, and then I left everything, all my wealth, and I followed him. Matthew's not a bragger. So all Matthew writes about his account is that, yeah, I arose and I followed him. But if you go to Luke's gospel, Luke goes into great detail and tells us just how incredible this reaction was, that he left everything to follow Jesus. The wealth, the success, the reputation, and the Roman authorities, he was a man of influence. He left it all immediately with immediacy to follow Jesus. And I love that Matthew doesn't brag on himself. There's a biblical principle in the book of Proverbs, chapter 27, verse 2. You don't have to turn there, but it says, let another man praise you and not your own mouth. People that boast about themselves, there's a great principle here. Matthew didn't, a humble man. He kind of elbowed Luke and said, you do it for me, bud. Just kidding. No, Luke just knew it, and he wrote about it because Luke was amazed at the incredible reaction here. But Matthew was decisive. You see, at this time, Jesus' reputation was just forming. There were a few miracles that Jesus had done. Matthew knew very little about what was taking place, but he was drawn. Something about Jesus, in contrast to the condition of Matthew's life, attracted him. And you see, when I think about building a team, you know, I'm a big college football guy. I like watching the NFL draft. You know, I love watching the process of NFL teams picking the best college players. You know, there's an NFL draft board and there's projections about who's going to go where. Now, in the discipleship draft, which Jesus was doing, he had grabbed a couple of fishermen, and then if I were Jesus, right, I'm not, right, but if I were Jesus, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to pick 12 guys to radically transform this world, he goes to Matthew at a tax collector's booth. Just knowing the opposition and the confusion and the reaction that he might receive from the surrounding crowds and those who he was inviting into a discipleship with him, but he chose Matthew. And he said, Levi, I'm not gonna keep you as you are. I'm changing your name, and I'm gonna do a work that no eye has seen or ear has heard through your life. So here was Matthew being decisive, verse 10. Now it happened, as Jesus sat at the table in the house, that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. So not only was Matthew's reaction and response immediate, he then takes it a step further and he says, you know what? I'm gonna invite all my buddies at the IRS, right? And we're gonna gather together for a huge feast because the love and the grace that I'm experiencing with Jesus right now, I want my IRS buddies to feel the same and encounter Jesus the way I did. He immediately became an evangelist. He couldn't contain himself. He threw a big feast. He invited Jesus. The 12 disciples, or the disciples at that time that he had gathered were with him. And there was a grand party taking place in Matthew's home. Now, Matthew was wealthy. So wealthy homes had outdoor courtyards and patios, and no doubt with the music playing and the food and the laughing and the jokes going around, people were having a great time. No doubt the religious elite, the Pharisees and the scribes, caught wind and they thought, what is going on? You see, they were skeptically investigating Jesus because he was a threat to their power and authority. And so when they heard that a tax collector had invited the IRS over to his house and Jesus was there, it drew a crowd. And those Pharisees made their way down to investigate what was taking place. But there's something about Matthew's reaction that I feel gets lost in the life of a Christian. You see, it's easy for our Christianity to grow stale. We become all about consuming and not doing what Matthew did, and that is evangelism and reaching out. I remember in college, I went to a Catholic university. I was born again, was going to a Calvary Chapel there in South Bend, Indiana. And every Sunday, I would go around and I wouldn't quit until my car was full of people I could invite to go to church. Man, I was young, I was zealous, and my friends, one by one, were receiving the Lord for the first time. It was wonderful. And then something happens as I get older. I get a job. I get bogged down with stress. I have a family. I have commitments. I have bills that need to be paid. And that zealousness and that zeal, it kind of just falls to the wayside. And I become a consumer. I come to church. I get fed. Don't get me wrong, that is wonderful. But my life then becomes defined by receiving, and I lose that passion for reaching out and seeing what can I do that others within my circle might hear and receive the transforming message of Jesus Christ. Matthew understood. The first thing he did was he threw a party, put up posters in all the IRS offices, and man, his house was filled with people. Now, it captures the attention of the Pharisees, verses 12 through 13. Verse 11, it says, and when the Pharisees saw it, verse 11, they said to Jesus' disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? So they immediately judge, because in their mind, those weren't the people that Jesus should be relating to. And notice that he buckets tax collectors with sinners. That gives you an idea of how despised these tax collectors were. Verses 12 through 13. When Jesus heard that, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Jesus challenges the mindset of the Pharisees that were more focused on their reputation and the appearance of being holy, but inwardly, they were what Jesus referred to as whitewashed tombs, dead inside spiritually, but painted on the outside to look religious. And Jesus said, "I've come for this very purpose. I'm a doctor," Jesus would say spiritually. "I am the great physician." The best place for a physician is the waiting room of a hospital with people who are sick and waiting to be seen and helped by me. He came to meet the needs that everyone has. We're spiritually dead apart from Jesus. We're struggling with sin. We need the Lord in our lives. And he's making this point, saying, "Pharisees, you don't get it. I've come to touch and heal and transform people's lives." But the Pharisees were so far off in understanding this. You see, and I see this in the church often. I've been in pastoral ministry for about 20 years, and throughout those 2 decades, I've seen men come to church every week, and they say, "I'm fine." And they sit in the pew or the chair. The message is taught, and inside there's bleeding, there's hurting, there's sickness spiritually. And yet they sit in the chair, and they never dare stand up to say, "I need help." And I've seen it time and time again. But Jesus says, "I've come to the waiting room, church. And I'm inviting you to step out of that chair and come to me. I'm the great physician. Let me put my finger on that situation. I can do things that no eye has seen and ear has heard that will blow your imagination, what I'm capable of doing with a life that is fully surrendered to me." And yet we come and we sit and we're content with that. A physician can't do his best work unless the patient is willing to surrender to the hands of that physician and allow his medical expertise to do its work. And that is what Jesus does. We're in the waiting room, and he's waiting for us to just get up and say, "Lord, I know you see what's going on with the x-ray, whatever the case might be spiritually. I invite you as the great physician to leverage your expertise to do a work in my life. I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of bleeding. I'm tired of sin and the consequences of it. Make me healthy." Jesus is saying in these verses that he's come to those who are sick. And he's saying, "I desire mercy and not sacrifice." I don't care how much you sacrifice for me. I don't care about the outward activity in your life if inwardly you're not showing mercy to people. It's not about what we do for the Lord. It's who we are in the Lord and the fact that Jesus has changed us and wants that influence to spread to those around us. And so many of us focus on just what we do for the Lord, what we sacrifice for the Lord, and we fail to recognize that there are hurting people around us in desperate need of mercy. And we are the exact vehicle that the Lord wants to use to bring them to the hospital, that they might see the great physician. But you see, that activity of reaching out and piling people in our cars and inviting them to that Bible study and bringing them to church. That won't happen unless we recognize just how forgiven we are. He who is forgiven much loves much. He who is forgiven little, the scriptures say, loves little. When I walk with a reminder that the Lord has forgiven me, a sinner, He has taken me and changed my name. He's put me on the path, that narrow path leading to heaven. When I consider that, where I was and where I am and all that God has done, I stand amazed. And I can't help but say, I want other people to receive the same mercy that I've received. It's not about what I sacrifice for the Lord. It's about extending that mercy and love and inviting people into this relationship to see and experience Jesus in His transforming love. Verse 14. Then the disciples of John came to Jesus, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" So the story's taking a turn here. You see, not only are the Pharisees intrigued by what's taking place at this dinner with the tax collectors and Jesus, but now the disciples of John the Baptist are on Jesus' radar, or Jesus is on their radar, I should say. For you see, John the Baptist was a prophet that was paving the way for Jesus' arrival. And he was preaching in the wilderness a gospel of repentance, getting people to turn from their sins, preparing the way for Jesus to come and finish the work of salvation. Now, during this, I would call it an intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament of Jesus' arrival, John the Baptist played a pivotal role, had a critical ministry, and he had amassed a following of disciples. Some of them immediately started following Jesus. Others were more skeptical, didn't fully understand. And so it is these disciples who were a bit confused, saying, well, wait a minute, John. The way we're living Christianity right now, outwardly, we're fasting 2 days a week. It was very customary in their day to fast 2 days a week, which happened to be the 2 busiest days of the marketplace. People would fast, and they would let everyone know they were fasting. They would paint their faces white. They would walk the streets of the marketplace and raise their hands praying so that people could say, oh, look at Steve. Oh, he's sacrificing and fasting. Look at him praying. Oh, I wish I could be like Steve. That was their picture of holiness, their picture of obedience. Now, John the Baptist and his disciples were confused because that was what they equated with holiness and spirituality. And here was Jesus eating and dining and feasting and having a great time with the people he came to heal. And they could not wrap their minds around this. So they asked Jesus, what do you make of this? This deviates from what we believe Christianity to be. So verse 15, Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast." Jesus is using a beautiful picture of a Jewish wedding. You see, in Bible days, especially a Jewish wedding, there really wasn't a honeymoon. So what people did was they got married, and then they retreated for 7 days, usually in the house of the father, and all their friends and the wedding party would be invited, and they would feast and enjoy each other's company and dance and enjoy music and celebrate the wedding that had just taken place. It was a celebratory time. And for a Jewish believer, someone in Jewish days, this was a luxury, a treat, to be away from work for 7 days, to be able to enjoy family, enjoy friends. It was a joyous occasion. And what Jesus is saying here is, listen, there's going to be a time for fasting, but that time is not now. I, as the groom, am here. I am here to save and to love. And while I am here, it's like a wedding. It's time to celebrate. And let's soak it up and soak it in, the teaching and the work that I desire to do. So he's telling them that now is not the time to fast. And he's comparing this question and his response to a Jewish wedding. It's a time of joy. Fasting will come later, verses 16 through 17. Now he teaches a very important truth here. He says, no one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment and the tear is made worse. It'd be like you getting a hole in your jeans, taking a brand new square patch of denim that's never been washed, and you sew it up to cover the hole in your used and well-worn jeans, and then you throw them in the wash. If the patch you put on your well-worn and laundered jeans isn't washed first, when it's in the dryer, when it's being washed, the heat is going to shrink it. And the patch that you thought was going to cover the hole is going to make it far worse because it's going to shrink and pull on the threads that you had just sewn, and the hole's going to be worse than when you started. And then he goes on to say, nor do they put new wine into old wineskins, or else the wineskins break, the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. Now, in their day, they used animal skins as wineskins. That's what they used to contain their wine. And if you have new wine that ferments and you put it into an old wineskins are rigid. They're hard. There's no flexibility to them. And so if you put new wine in an old wineskin, over time, as the wine ferments and the gases build up, it bursts the wineskin and the wine is lost. Jesus is saying, no. New wine needs to be put in new wineskins so it flexes with the fermentation process, and a new patch can't be put on an old garment. And what he's saying here, he's ushering in a new era, the life of the Spirit in the church. He's ushering in new teachings that every listener would have been required to pay attention to if they wanted to understand the work that Jesus came to accomplish. And he's saying, you can't take my teachings and the spirit life that I'm going to spend some time unfolding while I'm here and put it into your old system of religiosity, of the old mindset that you are operating under, of temple sacrifices, of the checklist of worshiping me in the temple. You can't do it. The new wine, the new patch, must go on a transformed life. I need to make you brand new for you to receive the life that I've come to give you. And this is where the concept of being born again comes from. Jesus said he wasn't just coming to patch up our lives. He was going to make us completely new. Born again, the old is gone, the new has come to contain the Spirit that he would gift us, which we read about in the book of Acts. That's for another Bible study. But Jesus is saying here, to simplify things, that I've come to do a new work, and in order to do a new work, I need to change your clothes, Steve. New clothes. New work, that's what I've come to do. Verses 18 through 19, read with me. While he spoke these things to them, behold, a ruler came and worshiped him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live. So Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. So Jesus now, as he's ministering in that region, is approached by a man named Jairus. How do we know him? He's not named in the Gospel of Matthew, but the Gospel of Luke and the account of this same story calls him by name. And we also know from Luke's account that she was 12 years old. I love the detail that Luke brings us in his gospel. You see, Luke was a physician, so he's very detail-oriented. And so Luke shares these details with us so we better understand the story. We also learned that he was a ruler of the synagogue, which means he was a who's who of society back then. He would have been responsible for organizing the teaching of the local synagogue, so he was well known. Mark's account tells us that when Jairus came to Jesus, he fell at his feet in desperation, saying that his daughter, his little 12-year-old girl, was on the verge of death, is what he tells us. So verse 20 to 21, let's read. And suddenly, while Jairus is at his knees, a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years came from behind and touched the hem of Jesus' garment. For she said to herself, if only I may touch his garment, I shall be made well. So Jesus right now is confronted with two needs. He had a little girl, 12 years old, who brought life to her family. 12 years of joy, of grace, of an amazing childhood. And in a moment, she became ill. And that joy turned to sorrow. And Jairus, I have 3 girls. I couldn't imagine one of my girls knocking on the door of death. How this man must have felt coming to Jesus. Desperate. And while he's sitting there inviting Jesus to come, there's a woman pulling on his outer coat. And who is this lady? Well, she was a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years. Think about the contrast. 12 years of joy, then sickness. 12 years of sickness, wanting to find joy and healing. And she said to herself, if only I may touch his garment, I shall be made well. These two characters in our study highlight the seasons that we go through as Christians. Some of you sitting here are experiencing very little discomfort. Life is good. I've had those seasons. Job's going well, family's going well, life is good. And we find ourselves within those 12 years of this little girl just experience life to the fullest. And then we get the news from the doctor, or we get the news from our company, or we get the news from our family member, whatever the case might be, and our world comes crashing down. And what do we do in those moments? We go to Jesus. Now, some of us sitting here might have years and years of struggle. You've been dealing with those medical issues. You've had an estranged family member that you've tried everything, asking people to pray, and nothing is working. You have a struggle at work. You can't seem to consistently find your calling, and you feel lost. It's been 12 years of heartache for you. What is the answer? The same as the girl. You go to Jesus. These two people in two different stages and seasons find themselves from two different perspectives going to Jesus. And I love what Jesus does here in verse 22. Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, "Be of good cheer, daughter. Your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that very hour. Having a flow of blood for 12 years, no doubt hemorrhaging, she would have been considered unclean and banished from temple worship, out of fellowship, isolated, and she thought to herself, if only I can touch the hem of his garment, might I be healed. For you see, there was some superstitious theology here Her faith wasn't even perfect here. Because in those days, the Bible tells us in the book of Matthew that the Pharisees used to enlarge their tassels as a sign of holiness. So when someone saw a religious person, their hems and their tassels had been enlarged as a sign of holiness. So this lady thought, well, that must be where the power is. If I could just go touch the tassel or the hem of Jesus' garment, then I will be healed. And what I love about this was her faith wasn't even perfect. It was laced with superstition, and yet Jesus responds to her faith as imperfect as it was. She touched him, and she was healed. And I love this principle because I sometimes think that I have to have everything well organized for God to move in my life. And God says, no, Steve, you're the sick patient. I am the great physician. I do the great work of healing and moving in your life. You just need to come to me. This lady's faith wasn't perfect. But the Bible says, I tell you the truth, even if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. The book of Matthew tells us. Jesus takes the small faith we have, and he's able to do great things through it. What's interesting to note is that her faith wasn't a passive faith. It was an active faith. I shared with you earlier today in my pastoral experience, I've seen seasons of men and women coming and sitting in the pew, and they're in need of help, but their faith is passive. They don't get up out of the chair to extend a reach towards Jesus, and I've been that guy. I've been that guy week after week, sitting in the pew in need of desperate help, and yet scared to stand up and go to the Lord, scared to stand up and open up to another man, scared to stand up and confess the real struggle and need that I have. But I propose to you that it is in those moments when we become vulnerable that the Lord does his best work. She reached out, fought through the crowd, and the bleeding stopped. She was healed that day. Now back to our story as we land this plane here this morning. I can just imagine the frustration in the eyes of those who were representing Jairus. Remember, this whole encounter started with Jairus seeking help for his little girl who was on death's door. Jesus gets interrupted by this lady who had an ailment for the past 12 years. She's healed. There's great joy. And yet, the family of Jairus is still suffering. I can relate to Jairus. I'm praying for God to move in my life, and I feel silence. But I see him moving in the lives of other people. Oh, he answered that prayer, and he answered that prayer, and he answered those prayers. That person was healed. That person got a job. That person has experienced freedom. What about me? I'm praying and praying and waiting and waiting and praying and waiting, and nothing has happened. It's exactly how they felt. Whenever the Lord delays, there's purpose in it, church. And that's one thing I've learned as I've continued to walk with the Lord, is to embrace the seasons and to learn to be content in all things, trusting that the Lord knows what he's doing, that he is always at work, that he never takes his hands off the steering wheel. He is in full control of my life. It's hard to remember that, especially going through seasons of need. And in verses 23 to 26, we read the rest of the story. Read with me. When Jesus came into the ruler's house, and he saw the flute players and the noisy crowd wailing, he said to them, "Make room, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when the crowd was put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went out into all the land. Jesus followed through and answered the prayer of Jairus here. But something I want to highlight that I don't want us to miss, that when Jesus entered that house, there were doubters in that house. There were people questioning whether Jesus could truly perform this miracle of raising this little girl from the dead, from her sickness, from death's door. And there were people that were doubting the work of Jesus, and before Jesus could actually work, he got those people out of the house. And I think about my life. I want to be a man of faith, but I too have people chirping in my ear saying, "Your God isn't as big as he claims to be, Steve," or "Are you serious about taking that step of faith?" Or "I can't believe you guys are trusting God in that area of your life." Can you relate? I remember hallmark decisions in my past, and I love my dad. In fact, I was just talking to my dad last week because I had graduated from college. I had a dream job, and I told my dad that I felt the Lord calling me to volunteer for no money on a horse farm, cleaning stalls and loving on kids. And my dad, who had just been working 50, 60, 70 hours a week to keep me in college, was just like devastated. He's just like, "What is my son doing?" And we were able to laugh about it last week. But I remember sharing my calling with my dad, and my dad being always supportive, a little perplexed by my life choices. We have those people in our lives who may not understand fully what the Lord is doing. But I'm glad I took that step of obedience because I met my bride Aubrey during that season. That 1 year I took off of college, God brought me the greatest gift before my kids, right? During that year. And it's all about obedience, walking with the Lord and trusting him, knowing that other people might not fully understand the steps of faith we're taking. Jesus put him out of the house, and he performed a miracle. He touched and healed this little girl in that moment. So in closing, I'm going to invite the worship team to come up here. I started off by talking about Matthew's calling and the immediacy with which he responded. Listen, church, if the Lord is speaking to you about an area of your life or something he's asking you to do not delay, do it. Secondly, I talked about putting on new clothes. Perhaps the Lord is wanting to do something new through our lives, but the box we have fashioned our lives in don't account for any room or flexibility. I encourage you to pray, if you're married with your spouse, if you're single, pray about what the Lord would have you do, how he wants to use you. Perhaps he wants to pour out a fresh work of the Holy Spirit in your life, and he needs you to think about a new container to contain it. And then thirdly, if you can relate with this little girl, life has been good. Just know that there is going to be a season of need, and how you fashion your faith and your walk with the Lord today will matter when your world comes crashing down. If you're experiencing a time of need right now, just know that the Lord hears, he knows, he sees. And if you've been someone who's been sitting in that chair for week after week after week, and you've never taken advantage of standing up and going to our prayer team, available every week, may today be the day that you stand up and you seek out prayer, just like this woman, and say, "I need prayer because I'm hurting, I'm bleeding, and I need the Lord to intervene." Our prayer team would love to meet you, pray with you, and it's a tangible way that we can activate our faith and come to the Lord and have him fill that need. So as this next worship song is playing, I'm going to invite the prayer team to actually stand in front of the stage here. If you're part of the prayer team, make your way up here during this next worship song. And if you need prayer, I invite you to come up and take advantage of these people who want to wrap their arms around your need and usher you and join you in going to Jesus, asking for his healing touch and move in your life. Let's stand.